single one of you for coming to my presentation of my senior research, how I turned symbols into shapes. Okay, so I think you've all noticed that I left a piece of paper and a pen on your seats. I want you guys to hold on to them because I'm going to be asking you to use them shortly. Okay, so many of us are probably familiar with music notation. Even if we ourselves are not musicians, we probably know what music notation looks like, what its purpose is, and what it's supposed to show, and how it's an archive for what a composer once wrote. Far fewer of us might realize that there's a parallel option for dance. So for my senior research, I wanted to investigate the process of reconstructing a dance from a score. What is a score? What does it look like? Who produces it? Who interprets it? What are its strengths, its weaknesses? These are just a couple of questions that I've been asking myself when formulating my senior research. Hold on to those questions and many more, and if you want, you can write them down on that piece of paper I gave you because it'll be helpful later during the Q&A process. All right, now I want to share a page with you from a score that I reconstructed that I'll be dancing today. So the page on the left is from the first part of the solo called Circular Descent, and the page on the right, is from the second part of the solo called Pointed Ascent. So this is just an example of what lava notation looks like. It is developed by a man named Rudolf Laban, who is considered one of the fathers of modern dance in Europe, especially Germany. He was a friend of Kandinsky and Scriabin in the world of arts, and he was an innovative thinker of dance theory. Although many people contributed to the development of this system, Laban was the initiator of the ideas, so it's named after him. In Europe, it's called kinetography Laban, and in the United States, it's called lava notation. Before I get into the nitty-gritty of lava notation, first let me explain how I got to this point. So it was my sophomore year here at Denison, and I was taking a Laban movement analysis class with visiting professor Aaron Law. I was so taken by everything that we were learning in that class, and was especially captivated by the fact that I could take symbols and represent movement. Knowing that I had a very strong interest in this field of dance, Sandra Mathern-Smith put me in contact with Mara Penrose, who was working on a reconstruction project in Columbus that summer. I immediately told her that I was interested in being a part of her project and wanted to learn more about how to read lava notation. That summer, I worked alongside many other dancers in the Columbus metropolitan area to recreate a movement choir, which was notated by Rudolf Laban himself in 1933, titled The Walzer. After performing this with a small number of people over the summer, I decided that we should bring the project here to Denison. Mara Penrose, Gil Wright Miller, and I worked with students here at Denison to teach them the movements, and then they went on to teach the movements to other students as well. We ended up having about 80 people participate in recreating the spectacular movement choir here on the campus commons, and we performed it in these really awesome blue ponchos. So here's my favorite shot of this project together. During the piece, as you can see, there's a lot of us, so we were kind of just like having fun, and then all of a sudden applause broke out, and none of us knew why until we saw this picture. So we created that really beautiful image. And then it was towards the end of my junior year here that I decided that I wanted to take on the task of reconstructing a dance from score by myself. The only problem was that I haven't had any formal training in reading dance notation. So this past fall semester, I took a beginning notation class with Rochelle Riggs-Leva and also danced in a piece that she was reconstructing from score titled Commonplace by Susan Hadley. So here's an example of a few simple notated measures. So I'm going to show you guys kind of a short demo of how to read notation. So this is what a staff looks like. The box part is the staff. There's a middle line down the middle, obviously, and then there's symbols on each side of that are what represent where you're supporting yourself. So most of the time it's feet, but there are plenty of dances that you're not supporting yourself on your foot, you're on your hip, but there are symbols that indicate that. This one in particular, the supports are in the feet. The beginning part, where there's a little double line, which you probably can't see, it's kind of small, that's your beginning position. And so the beginning position here being shown is that my feet are standing in middle level, and my arms are down at my sides, just like this. And so the way that I would go about reading this would probably be starting with just the feet. So in the first measure, the feet are going forward in middle position, or in middle level. That's what the dots indicate, and then the symbol with the little thing going forward means forward. So the first measure of just feet is just 1, 2, 3, So then the second measure with feet, I'm going forward on my right and then plieing for 2 counts and holding. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Then the next 2 measures are the exact same thing, just on the other side. So 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So the next thing I would do is just the arms in place to get it together. So the arms are first going forward for 2 counts, 1, 2, and they're slightly bent. That's what the X represents. And then they're going to place high for 2 counts, 3, 4. Then they go down out to the side for 2 counts, 1, 2, and then they hold until the end of 4 and go back down. And then they repeat, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and. So then I would put the whole thing together and try and make a cute little dance with it. So this is what this shows. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's a little bit of how to do meditation. So after immersing myself in learning Lava notation for an entire semester, I felt kind of prepared to start the task of reconstructing 2 ecstatic themes by Doris Humphrey. Since I know very little about Doris Humphrey prior to this project and have had no training in Humphrey technique, I really had to do research. Doris Humphrey was an incredibly talented and innovative dancer when modern dance was on the rise in America. She had become a star at the Denison School in LA run by Ruth St. Dennis and Ted Shawn. After about 10 years of working with Denison, Doris decided that she didn't quite like what they were doing there, and she decided to break off and go to New York with her partner Charles. There in New York, she experimented with creating her own unique movement where everything had deeper meaning. She believed that each movement had its own purpose, and it wasn't until creating the solo 2 ecstatic themes that she really solidified what her technique was. Some of Humphrey's technique's main aspects are fall and recovery, spatial intention, and weight. Using the weight distribution to create movements such as falls are important to Humphrey technique. I like to think of her concept of fall and recovery as something more like falling into another movement. So instead of just falling out of a movement and like dropping everything, so falling and then drop everything, a dancer will then instead fall and make it into another movement, something like that. So now that I've touched on what Humphrey technique is, let me try to show you. I will now perform 2 ecstatic themes, choreographed by Doris Humphrey, notated by Jane Marriott, and reconstructed by myself. Please feel free to take notes while I perform on your papers, because it will be useful when we get to the next part. Curious about whether the symbols actually written in the score showed something about technique. Excuse me. So I'm going to show you guys 4 separate clips, all by different choreographers in their own technique. And I just want you guys to take any notes that you feel free to do on your paper for each video. And then at the end, I'm going to ask you which video you think was most closely related to the solo I just did and why. Stop with the room. So I know some people have to go because they're in solos rehearsal, so if you guys have to go, that's totally okay. I know solo wants to rehearse. If you just will leave your papers over here on the side so I can look at those, that would be awesome. Thanks, Kelly. Okay, so while people are getting ready to leave, has anyone finished answering? Does anyone want to share which video they thought was most closely related? Keon?
I think it was the second one.
Video 2?
Yeah, second one.
Okay, why?
Me personally, I saw the most, in terms of the movements, I saw the most amount of movements from the second one that kind of ringed in my head. And then I thought, I guess, since I'm not really a dancer or anything, I don't know the proper terminology, I could say that the tempo was also really similar as well.
Okay. Does anyone else want to share what they thought? Okay, well,
C.
why do you think it was C?
Sure. I thought the footwork matched your style more closely,
Okay.
particularly the spins, and also, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't know the terminology either. So
That's fine.
But the arms as well really reminded me of the circular motif that you kept going back to.
Anyone else like to share their answer? Hannah.
I said A because I thought like the movement qualities was really similar. Okay, qualities were really similar. So, like I saw like the fluidity and like the fall and recovery in both, and they. While I know like the other ones were as well, they were very balanced. Yeah.
Okay, well I'm not going to tell you guys what the answer is. I'll just let you guys, because that's more fun for me. This is just a time where if anyone has any questions about like what I did, the process I went through or anything, feel free to ask. So, I'm open. Nope. Yes.
Are there like notations for like emotions, head movements, hand movements? Like, does it get that specific?
You can, like in my score, there's things written, like, as you're catching air, or things like that. So there are things written in there, but there aren't necessarily symbols for like feeling sad or happy or lustful or whatever. Anyone else? Yeah.
Is like the positioning of written down as well, like I think the first one with interaction with two-person, like one person goes to the front and like stage-wise.
Oh yeah, like where they are in place. Yeah, that's written. It's normally at the bottom. There's like this little thing that looks like this, and it shows their floor pattern. And when there's a dance with like multiple dancers, there will be like separate arrows for each dancer.
I would love for you to talk a little bit about how you read and then physicalized fall recovery. That was something you talked about at the beginning. You gave us the demonstration. I just want to hear a little bit about how you went about reading and physicalizing that.
Like in the score that I did?
Yes.
Okay, so first I did a lot of work with you, figuring out like what fall and recovery is and how it feels in my own body. And so then I went back after I had like completely finished the entire score, like roughly. I went back through and started like trying to find any place where I'm like, I feel like that place should have some fall and recovery. And then I, because I'm being analytical about this, I really looked to see if there were any symbols that might have like showed that it was fall and recovery. But I just went back and like, feel like this needs to be more like it, and then I would try to embody more, like especially like this part. I was like, oh, it must be falling and recovering. So like holding everything, but also looking pretty. So that's what I was doing.
I have a follow-up
Yeah.
to that. So you said you were looking for symbols that might tell you something about fall and recovery. Did you discover anything?
Well, there are some symbols that I think might, but I mean, again, it just depends. But there are a lot of symbols indicating a shift in your like center of gravity, and I felt like those were most present in the parts where I was either falling or like slowly coming up from the floor. Things that they really felt like Doris Humphrey was when that was notated. And there's also like little notes on the side that showed like effort affinities, which is, if anyone's familiar with Laban movement analysis, it's like having strong weight and quick time, something like that. And so I felt like having that in there was really helpful for me, not being familiar with Humphrey technique, to try and embody it more. Say what else? Yeah.
So I've heard you talk a lot about your musical background, and you mentioned at the beginning talking about musical notation, and I'm wondering what musical experience you brought to deciphering notation into movement.
Yeah, so yeah, I've been like doing music my entire life, so I think that was helpful, especially with like beats wise, because I mean, if you look at a staff closely, like there's a little tick mark for each beat, and there's a time signature at the bottom, so it like tells you what time it's in. And so knowing like how long each movement is, I think having that musical background really helped with me. And then also, I learned this piece first in silence because I didn't have the music yet. So then putting it to the music was at first kind of really challenging. So I would sit and play the music and follow along with my finger in the score and not dance it. And then I'm like, okay, this needs to happen here. So yeah, having that musical background I think helped a lot, especially since I still only have like now a semester and a half under my belt of like real lab notation experience. So yeah. Sandy, you had something?
Yes. What do you think was, or maybe, I mean, it's a hard question to answer, but what do you think are some of the things that you most significantly learned from this process about either embodying the score or reading the score?
Well, I learned that it's possible. Because there were some points where I'm like, how am I going to do this in the amount of time that I have? It seems kind of hard and daunting. But yeah, I think just reading notation in general, I've learned a lot because, I mean, taking the class last semester, and like we started with really rudimentary stuff. And now that I can have to say proudly that I've successfully reconstructed an entire piece, I mean, with assistance, but like, yeah, I just feel like I could look at another score now and be like, oh, I kind of know what this would look like, so it's just exciting. Anyone else have questions? Yeah.
So you said you incorporated the technique and the score, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what was like the hardest thing in like
I think the hardest thing was because I didn't have experience in Humphrey technique, so I'm not like a trained Humphrey dancer. So trying to first figure out what exactly Humphrey technique was and how I'm supposed to show that in my own body was really challenging, and I mean, I may or may not have even had success with it. So, I mean, that's just, yeah, that was definitely the most challenging part there.
Was there ever a part where you're like, I'm sorry, I didn't go to
Well, I mean, there were parts in the piece that I was like, I can't do that. And it's like, so can I change it? Not. So instead I just practiced it a ton. Like the side where I'm like on my arm, my leg, and I was here going like this, that took me forever to get balancing wise. So, yeah. Yep.
Can you talk about the space that exists between the actual perfect version of the dance, whatever that is, or whatever that is notated, and what you did, and the space that exists between those two versions? Can you talk about what that is for you, and how that exists, and what that does for where you are right now?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm going to say there's no perfect version of a dance ever, but so in terms of maybe perfect as like someone could look like a really good score reader could look at the score and then watch someone dance and they're like, yeah, they're doing that at the exact right time, every single one of these. So in that sense, I guess we could call that perfect. The space between that and what I did, I mean, there were a couple times where I got nervous and like sped up the movement, so like I wasn't completely in line with the score. I think if I had more time, I would spend even more time figuring out exactly where my facings were, because those are all notated, like really embodying everything that's on the page, because there are a lot of symbols sometimes. But it's really debatable on whether, like, how people feel about that, because some people, they want to recreate the exact same dance that Doris Humphrey did her first time she performed it, but that's impossible. So it kind of just depends. That helps. Sounds like I feel like you're talking in circles, but yeah, I was like, we have time for like one more question. I feel like guilty of it because she hasn't asked me.
This isn't really a closing question, but I just wanted to ask about kind of what kind of leeway is possible. You know, when you learn a music score, part of your responsibility to move it into an art form is to kind of lift those symbols off the page and also shape them into something that's the gestalt, you know, that's larger than just the symbols,
Yeah.
the technical proficiency. So I'm just wondering if you can talk about, is there a parallel in dance notation, and if so, kind of what was that process for you?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a parallel because, I mean, no two bodies are the same. So, like, two people dancing the same solo. I've also seen multiple videos of different people doing the solo, and they don't look the same. And myself doing it doesn't look the same either. So I think just, like, personal, like, aesthetics kind of get added in, whether you want them to or not. And also, I believe that if part of the score, like, doesn't fit with what you can do, so, like, at that point where I couldn't do this, I was like, how can I alter this? And then I saw a video of a girl who did it on her knee instead. So instead of supporting, she was here and doing it. I'm like, okay. So she changed the movement from what the score said, but it still accomplished the same thing, so I think that was acceptable. So things like that. And then also, we talked about in lava notation about this a little bit. Like, if you change the movements because they're, like, old or just they don't fit with, like, modern times, like, how can you change it without it, like, ruining the aesthetic of the dance and what it was meant to be? Is, like, put something just as fantastic and, like, gets the same point across. So, like, I can't really think of an example of that. But. Yeah. Well, that's it for tonight. And thank you all so much for coming. I really appreciate it.